Hello everyone, welcome to our channel of confession and cheating stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and enable the bell notification to increase engagement before we move on to our video. Let's move on to our video. The instrument of this great master was too powerful for me to refuse. I always believed that my life was typical. Once upon a time, I believed that my life was typical. I followed a certain routine at home. After I got up, made breakfast, and saw that my partner had gone to work, I would be alone. At first, I wasn't too worried. I assumed that this was how life was. To kill time, I would do chores, watch TV, and relax. But as the months went by, I began to feel an emptiness inside. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt that something was missing. I had no idea what it was. My partner and I hadn't met yet. We didn't have a real relationship. We were more like roommates. We only talked about the most basic things. I didn't know how to bring it up, but I felt like I was missing something deeper, like, "What's for dinner?" Or, "I forgot to pay the electricity bill." I was afraid of feeling this way because they seemed so content with life. To be honest, I had no idea if this was a problem. I questioned whether this was true of all marriages. My family lived far away, and I didn't have many friends. So my days were a lonely routine. Even when my husband was home on weekends, I felt lonely. I would sit in a corner while they went about their business. I waited in a corner for them to notice me and inquire about my emotional state, but they never did, so I kept it a secret. I guess I had somehow accepted the fact that I would always be alone, mute, and emotionally disconnected. Gradually, I began to see that my home was a reflection of my inner state. The well-maintained walls began to crumble. It was as if I was getting tired of the monotony and the house itself. I made an effort to suppress these feelings. I carried on as if nothing was wrong, but deep down I felt that something was wrong, and it bothered me more and more every day. I had no idea how drastically my life would change in the near future, and it all started with a simple home renovation. The home renovation started quite simply. I was tired of the musty smell coming from the corners and the cracks in the walls, so I thought it was time to renovate. After my partner agreed, I started looking for someone to do the work, but, as usual, they left everything to me. I searched for a few days before I found Miguel, recommended by my neighbor. I trusted Miguel a lot, so I contacted him to come and see me. When he first arrived, I had a negative opinion of Miguel. Simply put, he was a master. He immediately showed his professionalism and was kind and considerate. We discussed the tasks that needed to be completed at home, and he quoted me a price and explained what he could do. I chose to start the work the following week, as I thought the pricing was fair. At first, we talked about the work and nothing else. He would arrive early, pick up his equipment, and get to work painting the walls. I stayed with him to make sure everything was in working order. Miguel was constantly explaining to me what he was doing, telling me about the problems he was having, and reassuring me that everything was under control. He spoke calmly and often with a grin, which I appreciated. They seemed very different compared to my boyfriend, who was unpleasant and impatient. As the days passed, I realized that it was their presence I was waiting for, not the renovation itself. Our discussions extended beyond the confines of the house. They were asking questions about my day, my thoughts on the renovation, and even about their own lives, experiences, and families. Suddenly, I felt like I had a real conversation partner who was interested in what I had to say. It felt great to be around them because I felt like I had finally found someone I could talk to about my feelings and ideas. Slowly, I began to realize that there was something more, something that was developing inside me that I could not adequately describe. What started as a simple renovation began to have an unexpected impact on my heart. Little glances and grins began to change the tone of our conversations, which used to be just about the house, and I began to see that there was a connection that went beyond words. Something had changed, and even though I knew it was crazy, spending the whole day with Miguel had changed the way I felt. When they arrived, my house seemed to take on a new life and color. It wasn't just an exterior facelift. Something was being rebuilt, maybe even found, on the inside. Our conversations flowed in a way that was both open and deep, unlike anything I had encountered before. They seemed to understand exactly how I was feeling without me having to express it. And we began to discuss our lives in a way I could never have imagined. I talked about feeling lost and alone in my own home. They listened attentively and had a genuine expression that gave me the impression that they were genuinely interested. Miguel talked briefly about their lives, their work, their families, and the main hobbies they enjoyed in their free time. As I giggled at their stories, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. At some point, I started to feel different, but I'm not sure when. It was stronger than my reluctance to accept a connection. It went beyond simple pity or appreciation for what they did. There was something that hovered over me every time our eyes met. Something that made my pulse quicken, as if everything around us had disappeared and there was only that invisible space that united us. When he was teaching me something, our fingertips would touch softly, and I would feel a thrill of excitement and surprise run through my body. I made an effort to tell myself that I was exaggerating and that it was just friendship, but over time it became harder and harder to ignore the way he looked at me. Their appearance was different from that of a typical master. It was as if they could see through the cracks in the wall, as if they could see my flaws that I tried to hide from everyone, even from myself. They radiated a sense of lightness and skill that made me forget everything, even my marriage and my disappointments. The emptiness was not on my mind. I wanted that moment to last forever because they were all I could think about. There was no denying the bond between us. I made an effort to resist it, but I felt more and more attached. My longing to be close to them was growing every day, and I told myself that if I let it consume me, I could see what it would be like. I knew it was wrong, and even though I knew I was on a risky path, the feeling was too much to handle. I didn't even realize I was missing something until Miguel came into my life, and now I couldn't do without him. As time passed, Miguel's presence began to permeate my thoughts and my days, even when he wasn't there. It bothered me to know that my feelings for him went beyond a casual friendship. At unexpected times, like when I was doing the laundry or preparing dinner, I found myself thinking about them. Everything around me reminded me of a detail about them. The way they grinned, the way they looked at me, even the way their scent haunted me. I lost control of the passion I was experiencing. Watching them work, I found myself appreciating every move they made. When they were close to me, there was always a feeling of intensity, and I knew they felt it too. The world seemed to stop for a moment as we looked at him. I was excited, but at the same time I felt guilty because deep down I knew it was wrong. I was with someone. It was supposed to be a wonderful life for me. But with Miguel by my side, the repressed desire was getting stronger and stronger, and none of it seemed to matter. it becomes more intense. It's not just a physical urge. I don't want to be seen. I hadn't experienced this for a very long time. I was aware that I had to support these feelings, and yet I couldn't seem to get rid of them. My whole being yearned to be closer to them. Not realizing that I was on the brink of an abyss, every grin and every word was fueling this fire inside me. Some days I would stand in front of the mirror and ask myself, what happened to me? Because I didn't recognize my appearance. Where had that self-sacrificing person disappeared? The one who had worked so hard to maintain order in his life. I questioned how I had gotten to this point, but I also questioned how I had gotten to this point in my own development. When I imagined the new feeling I was experiencing with Miguel, I loved the rush of adrenaline that coursed through my veins, but this desire was also accompanied by a guilty conscience. How could I have such feelings for another person? Despite the distance between them, my partner was a kind person. It wasn't fair to them. They must not have wanted someone else. But how long could I keep these feelings going? The more I tried to ignore him, the more the urge grew inside me. I knew I was playing with fire as I thought about Miguel when I woke up in the morning, and about them when I went to bed at night. When they approached, all I could think about was them looking at me that way one more time, even though I knew I was about to cross a line I could never cross back. I wanted to experience their warmth on a deeper level. I wasn't sure how long I should suppress a longing that was creeping up like a bomb, ready to explode. My longing for Miguel grew so strong that when I could no longer hide what was going on inside me, my life began to seem like two separate planets. On the one hand, there was the person who did everything right, who followed the rules, who maintained the appearance of a happy existence and a stable marriage. But on the other side was someone who was trying to cope with an uncontrollable desire that was growing stronger every day. Miguel and I were only exchanging superficial glances and conversations, but I knew that what I was about to do would completely change the course of events. Even though nothing physical had happened yet, I felt guilty just thinking about someone else, even wanting someone else. My mind was constantly racing with ideas. Although I understood that my feelings for Miguel could only last for a short time, I wondered if I was ready to jeopardize the life I had created over the years. However, I also felt that my life was unfair because I was trying to be emotionless and suppress my feelings. How could I justify continuing to live a life devoid of passion when I knew I could feel so much more? With every glance, I was aware that I was about to cross a precipice. The solidity of my marriage provided some security. If I kept up appearances, my life would continue in the same way. Perhaps boring, but safe. The unknown, the excitement with Miguel, was on the other side. And yet, what would happen? Was I ready to face the consequences of following my passion? My brain wanted Miguel out of my thoughts. I needed to prioritize my marriage and avoid feelings that might lead me to behave inappropriately. But my body and my emotions were telling me otherwise. Something was being said. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. How could I ignore it? Sometimes I felt even worse when I looked at my husband, who was living his life normally without realizing that a storm was brewing in front of his eyes. Like me, I questioned whether they really loved me, or whether they were just keeping up appearances and meeting expectations. This inner struggle was unbearable. I was caught between two worlds. I wasn't sure which path to choose, and the decision was becoming more and more inevitable. Finally, I realized that I had to choose between continuing to live a life based on appearances and listening to what my desires and emotions were telling me. My daily existence began to feel the effects of the tension within me. Even if you were able to manage and hide how I was feeling before, this meant a lot to me. I started to take better care of myself for the first time in a long time. Even though I was just sitting at home, I was dressing more and choosing my clothes carefully. I knew it wasn't for my husband, but I still wanted to look great. They were looking at me and I was doing it so Miguel would notice. I looked at them the same way when my husband came home from work. They didn't notice the changes. They were so used to the routine that I don't think they noticed the new clothes, the different lipstick, or the sparkle in my eyes. It was like they were in a separate reality. It wasn't just how I looked that changed. They couldn't see what was going on in front of them. I became more irritable and cold, and our discussions, which were already infrequent, became more and more infrequent. I had to stop pretending to listen to what they were saying. My heart and mind were far away, where I felt fully alive, but my thoughts were always elsewhere, always with Miguel, as if my body was there. Sometimes I would try to engage in a more in-depth discussion with my partner, but they always seemed busy or lost in their own thoughts. They were playing on their phones or watching TV while half listening to me about the house renovations. This was very annoying. How could I make them see what was happening? I was hoping they would ask me how I was feeling, but they never did. Then Miguel came. They wrote everything down. They asked about my calmer and sadder moments. They approached me and insisted on talking until I grinned. I felt important in their presence, as if my feelings finally had some value. Everything they said distracted me from my problems. I began to feel more and more that something was missing in my life. It wasn't only my insides that were changing. The house seemed to be transforming too. Renovations were going on. The color of the walls was changing. Areas that had previously looked shabby and dead were now shining. It was as if the house was being reshaped, along with my life. My other half, which was getting stronger every day, wanted to tell everyone what had happened, but I wanted to continue pretending that nothing had happened. I wanted the world to know that I was different, that I had changed. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the repercussions. Meanwhile, I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Everything was hovering over me like a fog of doubt and desire. Every day I believed, I was closer to making a life-changing choice. Miguel never left. They helped me forget everything with their smiles. Even though none of us said it openly, I knew they shared my feelings. Between the words, the looks, the little touches, they were indisputable. The best part of my day was the time I spent with them. Even though I knew it wasn't normal, they were the best hours of my life. I couldn't go on living like this. I struggled with guilt and longing. As they got closer, my pulse quickened and I wondered, what if I let it happen? What if I give myself over to this passion without thinking about the consequences? But I kept in mind that I had a partner who was always there for me and a life I had built. I found myself on the edge of a cliff. I knew that if I continued, there would be no turning back. But there were moments when I couldn't help but give in to this new feeling. I was giving myself permission to imagine what could happen if I let myself. How would Miguel and I feel if we dropped everything and surrendered to this connection? As I fantasized, I felt alive, but also scared. And what would be the outcome? How would I deal with the shame? What if I was willing to ruin my marriage for something I wasn't even sure would last? Was I ready to ruin everything? I knew a choice was imminent. What I felt and what I knew to be true were separated by a faint border, and the closer Miguel got, the blurrier it became, the harder it was to perceive. I could no longer hide the stress in our once harmless arguments. A day came when everything almost changed. I went to see Miguel, who was finishing an important task at home, and the way he looked at me made it seem as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. There was a lot that went unspoken in the silence that ensued, and I could tell that they were thinking the same thing. For a few seconds, for what seemed like hours, we looked at each other. I believed I could hear my heart racing, and then it dawned on me. I couldn't do it. I had to choose between giving in to these feelings and not looking back, or breaking this bond completely, cutting Miguel out of my life and focusing on my marriage. I couldn't put this decision off any longer, even though it seemed impossible. Every day I felt more and more pressure inside me. I had to make a decision soon. No matter how hard I fought to control the situation, I felt deeply that fate was pulling me in a certain direction. Eventually, the stress building up inside me became too much for me to control. A storm is approaching. I felt like I was about to make a choice that would change my entire life, both emotionally and physically. I also had the impression that I had no control over what happened next. On an ordinary day, everything had fallen apart. In the kitchen, Miguel and I were having our usual conversation. I was lost in my own thoughts and unconsciously observing his movements as he finished organizing something in the cupboard. When he turned to ask me a question, we looked at each other. I knew then that there was no turning back. I knew from that look that they felt the same way. It was inevitable. Although none of us were moving, the space between us seemed to be closing. Everything around us disappeared, even the noise of the street and the sound of the devices. We were alone now. Miguel then moved forward instinctively, as if by instinct. My heart was beating so fast that it was hard to breathe, and the air was thick. I briefly considered stopping, putting an end to the moment before it became irreversible, knowing what was about to happen. But I didn't stop. When they finally touched me, I felt a wave of warmth throughout my body. It was everything I had feared, but also everything I had desired. They had a gentle but powerful touch. It caused every emotion I had been suppressing to come to the surface. The sound of the front door opening pulled me back to reality, and our lips almost touched, not caring what happened next. My lover had come home earlier than I expected. As soon as I heard the familiar sound of the door, I instantly recoiled, my heart continuing to race. Miguel stepped back, obviously worried. When I heard my partner's footsteps, I started to get really scared. I was having trouble breathing. My mind was clear of everything that had happened in the previous few minutes, and I was terrified. My body kept shaking, so I immediately turned around and tried to look normal. When my partner entered the kitchen, he didn't see anything strange. They exchanged pleasantries, talked about their work, and nothing happened. Miguel and I exchanged a brief glance, and I realized that this couldn't go on. No matter how deep our connection or how great our desire, the result would be disastrous. I wasn't ready to deal with it, and things have changed between Miguel and me since that day. While there was still tension, there was a quiet consensus that this should not continue. After Miguel completed the house a few hours later, we realized it was time to part ways, even though our goodbyes were filled with unspoken emotions. I was never honest with my partner. I never explained to them the extent to which I had betrayed their trust. They had no idea that I was about to ruin everything we had. When the renovations were completed, the house seemed to be revitalized. However, I knew that some of the scars would eventually leave me, And while I was sure that we had both learned a lesson from the incident, the urge was still there. No matter how strong our instincts are, we cannot always follow them. Well, friends, that concludes my confession. We have heard an intriguing confession in the fascinating confessions section. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell notification for more confessions. See you in the next story. Goodbye.